Hey guys, I'm here with Chris, and we're just going to give it about another minute to let some more people join. All right, we'll give it about another 30 seconds. And then as we go through kind of our presentation here, you guys can put some questions into the sidebar here. And then we'll answer some questions at the end, but maybe on the spot too, just depending on how it's going. Give it just a little bit more time. Still have some people joining. And all right, we'll go ahead and get going. So I'm really excited about this presentation that we get to go through. Chris and I spoke about this right after pretty much right after the games, that it's not often that you kind of have a fairy tale. I wouldn't call it an ending because Chris still wants to keep going for LA, but it's not often that a coach and athlete can really celebrate actually accomplishing the highest goal that he could accomplish in the sport. But I'm really fortunate to have been connected with the guys at INSCYD and Sebastian to help us along this journey. And we really wanted to share this data-driven approach that we took to take Chris to an entire different level of performance. So a little bit of background on myself. I've got a background in exercise science, and then I'm the head coach of USA Triathlon's Project Podium team, which is an Olympic and Paralympic development program through USA Triathlon. And then Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Chris. So I'm 38 years old, which I guess will matter as we talk about the data and go on. But I've been a Paralympian or a Team USA para athlete going on, I guess, since 2012 now. So it's been a dozen plus years. I was a runner before then. I moved to Arizona to train with Parker and Project Podium at the start of 2022 to try to finally achieve my dream and a goal of finishing on a podium at the Paralympic Games after finishing so close on a number of occasions. So I've been training as a relatively full-time athlete. I work part-time as well. I have a PhD in sports psychology. I do some work at Arizona State University here locally. So that's the relevant background for what we're going to get into.
Yep, for sure. So from my coaching philosophy standpoint, obviously, like every athlete is unique. You need to take a personalized approach. And I think it's important to take a data-driven approach. And that's really where elite sport is heading and is currently. I think we're kind of in this interesting crossroads with triathlon where you have some coaches and programs that have done the same thing for the past 30 years and haven't really evolved or taken sports science to all of its advantages that we have today. And then there's kind of this next generation that I feel like that we're a part of, where we're really taking where sports science is and trying to be on the cutting edge of it. And for me, that's really, I really got connected with INSCYD. So about 2.5 years ago, I took a bunch of our athletes from the team to a race in Cuba. It wasn't a super competitive Continental Cup, but it was a decent race for our athletes, and I brought 9 athletes there. And they all had terrible races. And so I got on the plane, and when you bring 9 athletes there and they all race bad, then it's not really the athlete's fault. It's my fault as the coach. And I had to really look at what I was doing wrong, and how we could kind of turn things around to start getting the results that the program is built for and what I wanted to do as a coach. I started doing some research on some of the best sports scientists in the world, and Sebastian Weber just kept coming up over and over and over again. And so I reached out to him and the guys at INSCYD, and with my education background being in exercise science and the previous roles that I had access to a lab and was doing regular lab testing with my athletes. But surprisingly, I didn't have that same level of access coming to USA Triathlon and having our program based out at ASU. We did, but the labs that we had available to us were really expensive. It was about $5,000 a day for us to be able to utilize some of the stuff that I could do in the past for much lower costs. So what Sebastian INSCYD has kind of created, where you can do a lot of the same physiological testing, but do it in the field. I liked that approach a whole lot more than even taking an athlete to a lab, because if I have Chris go through a VO2 max test on a treadmill, obviously his running economy is going to look different running on a treadmill than it would be running outside. So that's where we really started to adopt things, I'd say 2.5 years ago. And it has totally changed the way that I coach and the results that we've had in the program that I coach. Just in 2024, if you take all the podiums and wins from 2024, it's more than double what we did the previous 5 years before that. When it comes to Chris himself, Chris was 4th in the Rio Games, and then he was 4th in the Tokyo Games. And then he and I started talking to each other shortly after Tokyo, and he was looking to make a change to just try to go all in on triathlon and see what he could do going into the Paris Games. I remember having that conversation with Chris, and him talking about moving from West Virginia to Arizona and joining a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old guys to train. And when he finally came back to me and said he wanted to do it, I was like, all right, here we go. Like, I'm going to be learning a different world with the paratriathlon side of things, and we're going to see how it is with, how old were you at the time, Chris? Was that like 36 at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And a 36-year-old guy training with a bunch of 20-year-olds. And it's pretty awesome to look back at where we are now and how well that worked and how well the training environment worked for him. But Chris and his family made some big sacrifices to move their family across country and then start a whole different type of training that he hadn't done before, really led by the metabolic assessments that we do. So what is INSCYD and why did we start to use it? I gave a little bit of background there, but with this field testing that we do using blood lactate data and VO2 max data from a portable metabolic cart, we use the COSMED K5, which is kind of the gold standard at the moment when it comes to VO2 testing in the field. I'm able to get accurate VO2 max, which is, you can think of that as the size of your engine. VLamax is the efficiency of your engine. And this is really important with Chris's story that we'll get into a little bit later. But VLamax is basically the ability to produce lactate. And in practical terms, it measures your ability to use fat versus carbohydrate percentages of VO2 max used at threshold. When you hear us talk about threshold, we'll talk about like that's the steady state of lactate production and combustion when they basically equal each other out. You won't hear us talk a lot about FTP. Functional threshold power is kind of an outdated, no longer super relevant in elite triathlon coaching anymore. It was good when it was good, but that was like 25, 30 years ago when Andy Coggins really popularized that. And him and Hunter Allen are the ones that really kind of wrote the book on functional threshold power. But Now let's fast forward 30 years of where we are today, and there's a much deeper understanding of how an athlete gets to their threshold. Also with INSCYD, we're looking at fat and carb combustion at different intensities, which has been crucial as we went into fueling strategies and even daily nutrition, which we'll get into with Chris as well. And then lactate production and combustion as well was a big part of the insights that we get. So how we used INSCYD for Chris's training. So obviously, like with Chris's impairment, he's missing a hand. So swim efficiency is going to be the biggest thing for us to overcome. And so we were able to use INSCYD testing to try different techniques in the water to see which one that he was most efficient at. Also, you can use it to optimize wetsuit selection. And then what I think has surprised some people in the past is that Chris's training volume and his intensity got to be the highest of any athlete that I coach. He was swimming over 40K weeks. His training on a regular basis was well over 30 hours a week. And that made some big improvements on his swim. On the cycling side of things, his VO2 max went from 82 to 87. So Chris already came to me a very strong athlete, specifically on the bike. And then he has a running background, like he mentioned. But the improvements that we were able to make, and honestly, these two numbers are just from January to July. So he made some significant improvements on the bike, and his threshold got right at around 400 watts. And he went from 5.8 watts per kilo to 6.2. On the running improvement side of things, we increased his aerobic capacity by raising his VO2 max from 70 to 78 and his VLamax from 0.1 to 0.17. Now, when I went over these results initially with Sebastian and wanted to get his input, he was like, I think you may have like done some of the protocols wrong. Like 0.1 VLamax is like super low and like almost unheard of. And then he went through the data with me, looked through all of the stuff that we had done in that test, and yeah, he confirmed, nope, you're right. Chris literally has no anaerobic capacity whatsoever. So what we'll talk about with these training methods that we did it was super unique because specifically on the run, Chris basically trained as a sprinter. And we did a lot of really high intensity sessions. When we were going through the testing on the track, even for an all-out 1K on the track, I couldn't get his lactate to get above 6 millimoles. So it was like very, very low. And even to get 6 millimoles, it took us several months of training to get to that point. Now compare him to one of his teammates, and there's another guy on the team that his VLamax is way too high. And for his 1K all out, his blood lactate got over 20 millimoles. So the training methods for Chris were very different for what the training methods were for that athlete. And then probably one of the most impressive things was his body composition results. We reduced his body weight from 154 pounds to 143 going into the games. And he decreased his body fat percentage from 15% to 10%. That alone probably made a lot of the improvements that you see between the three sports, specifically cycling and running. And then this is kind of the performance management chart that you see on Training Peaks. I just filtered this from where he was January 1 all the way to the games. at the end, and you can see from the blue line just how high and how much he improved from a fitness standpoint over that time. So it's just kind of a cool representation. And then going to the next slide. All right. Okay, so this is kind of an example of a track session. It's not really even an example. This is like the track session that Chris did for months. We did nothing flashy. We repeated this over and over and over again to try to increase his VLamax. Main set was 200 meters all out with 600 meters jog recovery, but that 600 meters would take some time. Like we would go fairly slow. And then he would repeat this for a total of 2 rounds. So he would do 12 200s. Obviously, 0.1 to 0.17 doesn't seem like a big improvement, but when you have little to none anaerobic capacity, it made a big difference for his 5K time. Chris, what were you running in races when you look at your run off of the bike? Like, I think Yokohama was a big breakthrough for you last year, but before Yokohama, you were more in like the 16 and a half range.
I think so. Yeah. One thing I'm taking a step back. I mean, just in the workout itself, though, it took me a while even to slow down that jog recovery. You're like, no, go slow, because I'd probably be jogging through it around 7-minute pace. And it was hard for me to click to be going from the aerobic to the anaerobic, and like, okay, I'm just focusing on the 200 all out. And that was such a novel experience for me to do that workout. And even now thinking about it, in a sense, I enjoyed it, because you're not going out and suffering through mile repeats, but at the same time, when you're giving it everything you have for 200, it took me a while I'm not going to say perfect the workout, because I still don't think I ever did, but to really understand what it meant to go all out for 200. Because as an endurance athlete, and especially someone who's so aerobically oriented as I was, I just had no conceptual understanding of what it meant for me to push my body to an all-out pace like that. So it wasn't a workout we could just hit once and like get the benefit, for a number of reasons. Because first of all, I wasn't doing it right away. It took lots of practice for me to do that workout how it was meant to be executed, because I couldn't force my body to give that effort. But yeah, as far as run performance goes, when I came into the sport of triathlon, was probably when I was running my best, because that was right off of being a collegiate runner and a post-collegiate runner. And then as I kind of got better at the swim and the bike, I'd say my run kind of plateaued, or maybe plateaued a bit, maybe a few good, stronger performances here or there. But for the most part, there was definitely a plateau. And then after we did this, it was the first time in a decade where I felt like, not necessarily like I felt like a runner again, but it felt like I had some juice back in my legs. So it's hard to explain, but yeah, I don't know my times very well, but I was seeing improvements in my times, but I was also kind of having more confidence in my running. Like, I knew that I could change pace as the races became more competitive. When you're the pair of racing, it doesn't have the depth of competition as the elite able-bodied side, so you're not running in big packs. So a lot of times you're out there on your own. But as it did get to the point where I'm contesting at the very front of these races and to win these races, now again I had the confidence that not only could I run a strong 5K, but I could run a kick and things of that nature as well. So that was a few of the benefits I think I gained from these workouts, mental and physical.
Yeah. And I think that's a really key point to all of this, is I think what these assessments and what the way that we've used the metabolic testing and training is like test about every 8 weeks or so. Then I use that data to build the next training program. or the next build to the next event. And then we retest again to see if what we did worked. And with Chris on top of that, and honestly with all of my athletes, I think what it shows is what he's capable of actually doing. And I remember telling him what wattage I think he should hold going into the Montreal WPS race, and him like thinking that I was crazy. And then I think you had like a 30-watt PR during that race, and still ran one of your best runs off of the bike in the mid-15s range. So I think it's also really important that it shows what an athlete's capable of from a mental standpoint too. One question I have here on the side is someone asked on the Training Peaks performance management chart, like how do I use that if I don't use FTP? To answer that, basically, I don't. So the first time that I looked at that performance management chart all year was to throw it into the slide, basically as just a representation of his fitness, because what it does with the TSS is it obviously shows consistency in training, and it can help you see some adaptations, but I don't base any of our performance or any of our training methodology off of it. I wanted to put that in there as more just of a representation of the work that he did going into the games in the past year. Okay, so this next part is another pretty cool way that we used INSCYD. When you use gas exchange with the Cosmed K5 or a similar device, and you put that into the software with INSCYD, you also get economy. And you can see how economical an athlete is running or swimming. You can use it for swim and run. This right here is a shoe test that we did. We had Chris before the games. We were probably like 4 weeks out or so, like a month out, and we wanted to see what shoe that he was most economical in. And so the run one here was him using just regular trainers that he uses in training. The second run was the ASICS Metaspeed Edge. It was like their first edition of that. The third was their newest one, the Metaspeed Sky from ASICS. And then
it was the Edge Harris, actually.
Okay. And then the fourth was the Nike Vaporflies. So the lower, you want this as close to zero as you can get it, or ideally even in the negatives when it comes to metabolic demand. But what we wanted to see here is what was the easiest, not the easiest, but the most efficient and caused the least metabolic demand from a shoe standpoint. And it was really cool to see how easy it was to see which one was the best. And Chris even said it's the shoe that he felt the best in too. So that's what we used going into Paris. You can do this the same way using wetsuits. So you can test in the pool with different wetsuits. And the goal is to hit the exact same time and pace it the exact same way, and then see what it looks like when you throw it into the software, and then you can make your decision off of that.
What was interesting about that was I figured we bought the Metaspeed Edge Paris, a newer version of the same shoe. So I just thought it would be the better shoe because he figured they make improvements on the previous model. But yeah, I guess this really points to how important or how individualized each person is, because yeah, that's certainly the old original version was my preference for sure.
Yeah. Then when you look at
we might be having a voice.
Yeah, I think the network might be just a little unstable, so you might it might be a little choppy on you guys' end, so apologies for that. This what you're seeing right here is a part of the INSCYD software as well. It shows the different metabolic demand and then also lactate recovery and accumulation. There's a few charts, but these are the two that I like to look at the most. what I did here was compare a test that we did in April to a test that we did in July. And the dotted line is the later test. And so that may not seem like a big shift, but it is. Like, we were basically at 399 watts. In April, Chris was accumulating 0.39 millimoles of lactate a minute at that pace. And then fast forward to the improvements that he made going into July, and it was 0. So that's the goal that you do with training. You want to get to be able to push higher wattage on a less metabolic demand. So this is just how we can compare those side by side to each other in the software. Here is 2 DEXA scans that he took. So we do like to look at body composition. That's also a metric that you put into the software as well. And this was back in December. Chris was 100 and I can't see it very well on my end, but I think it's 154 pounds if I remember right, and 15.1% body fat. And then fast forward to where he was a month out from the games, and he had dropped to 143 pounds and at 10% body fat. And I think that he had even lost more weight going into the games, where I think one day I told you, I was like, you need to stop losing weight now. Like, you're in a good spot. But Chris, talk a little bit about that, and that I feel like we did it in a healthy way. We didn't talk a whole lot about like, hey, you need to lose all this weight or anything like that. It was more about just like optimizing fueling strategies. You obviously are training more, so you're losing some weight. But then you can talk about the infamous grocery store story.
So, okay, there's a few different directions to go with this. First of all, I love junk food. I love dessert food especially. And I don't do the majority of the cooking. I do all the cleaning of dishes, but I don't cook for myself. But my wife is a much better cook than I am. So she makes all the dinners. I do all the cleaning. So when I went to Park City to train in the summer, this was going to be the first time I was going to, be making, other than like breakfast and lunch, when I'll do like eggs and stuff like that. But I was going to be preparing all my meals exclusively for the first time since, I don't know, back in college before I was married. And so I went to the grocery store, and I just, you kind of, especially with someone with a sweet tooth, you get sucked into all the things that there is to offer. And so I found all these cool products that I did not know existed, such as like, cereal flavored frozen waffles and like these like frosting and stuff. I was like, oh, this will make good desserts. And of course, I took a picture of it, and almost immediately, within 15 minutes, Parker sends me a message like, you're just joking, right? Like, this isn't real. I said, well, I got other stuff too. I didn't just get these waffles and this frosting. And the tone changed pretty quick. He's like, well, that's not elite. That's not going to help you get achieve your goal in Paris. And just like, we're doing everything we can to help you accomplish your goal. Like, why are you going to jeopardize it by making these sort of decisions? So that was kind of a wake up call for me. And I was like, well, honestly though, I don't know what's like. I'm going to struggle to figure out.
Was the best for him using INSCYD data and his
Oh, was
sorry,
that
Chris. Yeah, you dropped off for a second. I told them I finished kind of.
I think we lost Parker. Let's give him 5 minutes or minutes really to reconnect.
Do you have me currently?
Yeah, I have you, but Parker's gone.
Okay. Well, I'll just. I'm not sure. Yeah. Essentially, I wasn't eating well. Parker set me straight, and that's was a big help. But then another funny thing that happened was I had to, like, before the games, the USOPC sends you these forms to fill out, just like from physical health, mental health, and all these things. And on the questionnaire, there's questions like, "Are you worried about your weight? Are you trying to lose weight?" And I'm like, yes, and yes, and yes. And so I got like calls and stuff before the games because people were concerned, like, for the sports scientists, sports psychologists with the USOPC, were like, of course, like mental health, mental well-being is all important. And they're like, I think I probably drew a red flag because of my weight concerns. And so don't, like, this is only temporary. I'm doing this in a controlled manner. I plan to put it all back on, but it was just one of those things that was, I think, one of those last like levers of performance I really didn't play with until 2024. Before that, I put in the effort, but in training, but the nutrition side of things was something I was always a little lax with.
All right, Chris, am I back?
Yep, we have you.
Okay, sweet. Sorry about that. Yeah, so let's go into Paris and it actually happening and the goals that we set actually coming through. So the goal going into Paris was obviously to make sure that Chris had all the tools that he possibly could have to win the race. And when Chris moved to Arizona, the conversation was, I'm moving to Arizona to win a medal. And then somewhere in 2024, I think it was after Yokohama, he and I had a conversation and I was like, I don't think that we need to be shooting for a medal. Like, I think you can win. I think you can get the gold medal. He had a breakthrough day in Yokohama, followed up with that in a race in Montreal. Then I think the race before Paris, you got fourth, and we were like, like we gotta take a look at this and what may have gone wrong here. But it was a really technical race, and he wasn't able to push the power. It basically was just a course that didn't suit him.
So Yokohama was a win in May. That's when you told me you thought I could win, and I didn't believe it. Then Montreal, or then I think Swansea came before, and then that really shook my confidence. That was the technical course. I took a really bad turn on one of or a line on one of the turns that I think kind of shook my confidence for that performance as well. Clipping a pedal and just like probably not biking nearly as I guess what would be as aggressively as I needed to. And then I think Montreal was the next performance. I forget if Swansea or Montreal were first, but they were in back-to-back weekends. And then Montreal was a really strong bounce-back performance where that was the first time I believe, I had the confidence that a gold was possible, but still nothing, even a medal would have been a victory, I think, at that point was my mindset.
For sure. And the swim has been, even when you compare Chris to the other athletes in his category, that's been the biggest thing for us to overcome. Obviously, as everyone knows, the swim in Paris was like just a big conversation. And there was a lot of people talking about water quality, and we didn't even know if the race was going to happen on the day that it was scheduled. And when also in that swim, you had a lot of current as well. So we had to there was a lot that we had to do from a swim efficiency standpoint, practice drafting, all of that to make sure that he didn't lose the race in the water. And the thing that was unique about Paris is I think it's the only race that Chris at the WPS level has come off the bike in first. And so he was able to I think you were about like a minute back out of the water, and then you made that entire minute up over the 20K bike. And I say in this, Chris executed his race plan almost perfectly. Because Chris, you can go ahead and tell what happened.
Yeah, so the swim was, I'll give a brief overview of the entire race. The swim, it was a tough, because even though like the strong current hurts you more than it helps you, obviously. So you go out flying, and on the way back, you're swimming serpentine along the shoreline and the structures over there to try to avoid the current as much as you can. But it's not like they shortened the course to make it less than 750 to account for the detours you're taking. So it was a longer swim, and I just was able, fortunately, to hop on someone's feet to kind of guide me through the majority of that swim. So it was an acceptable swim to me. It wasn't stellar, but it put me within striking distance. Then when I got on the bike, after the first lap or so, someone from USA Triathlon was giving splits, and the first split I saw was not encouraging. I made up no time from the start of the bike. Then the next split, I made up a ton of time. I found out after the fact they just messed up my very first split they gave me. I was making up time all along. But essentially, I did not think I was making up enough time. So I was really like giving the bike everything I had, even maybe more so than normal. I did actually, I did clip an inside pedal on one of the turns, like just going so aggressive. But it's Paris, so you're giving it everything you have. And so, I was. So I think having gotten the wrong information that I was maybe not as close to the front of the race as I was hoping I would be, I was digging even deeper than I might otherwise have been, which turned out to work well. But it was almost so much so that going into T2, I was still passing people, going very up into T2. And it's different when you're on a tri bike. Obviously, you're down in the aero position. You're not because the para racing is draft illegal. So yeah, you're riding a tri bike. So you're in that very tough aero position, which is something we've been emphasizing all along. And so I just come up onto T2 way too quick, failed to get, and like I said, I'm still working to pass people, and I'm still in the bike. I haven't switched mentally from bike to transition mindset. And then just come up on T2 way too quickly, failed to fully unclip out of my, or not unclip, get my feet out of my shoes. And I'm just I know that if I don't want to get a penalty. And so I just kind of tumble over right before the T2 line just because I just came up way too quick on it. Tumbled over, embarrassing fall at the most important race of my life. I did not get a penalty, which was the goal. But I got up into the top position on the bike, only to see them just then zoom past me into T2. And so I gave up however many seconds with that poor end of the poor T2. And psychologically, that kind of worked well for me, because then my mindset was, if I lose this race because I made this stupid decision, I wasn't focused, I let my mind, I wasn't in the race, and I'll never forgive myself. So that kind of set me up for a good run, just from the standpoint. It was a kick in the butt to get going, but not that wasn't the ideal way to play out T2.
Yeah. So what I think from a training standpoint that also made a big difference was Chris's fastest 1K of the 5K was the first 1K, because he made a big sprint out of T2 to catch back up, put himself back in the lead. And this picture here in the slide, you've got him and the Brazilian guy that were kind of going back and forth. And Chris was freaking me out during the run, because it was well, first of all, it was awesome that I knew, okay, with 2K to go, he's looking like he's in clear medal contention. He's going back and forth between first and second, but I know he can win this. They kept swapping back and forth. and I was screaming at him just to drop him, but he had this pain face that I was like, oh man, he looks like he's hurting. Then after the race, he tells me it was one of the easiest runs that he's had because of how fit that he felt, and that the pain face was just all part of the psychological part of making the Brazilian think he was working super hard when he wasn't.
I don't know. It's completely that. Yeah, it like looking back, I felt like we were trained to run like a minute or so faster than what I did. But I mean, yeah, Ronan, the Brazilian, ran like an awesome race, and because he would just be like, he was on my heels, literally kicking my shoes like with steps. And so he was like getting into my head a little bit, frustrating me. Then like if I took a lead, he'd like immediately run up to take the lead back, like, you know, elbowing me in the process. Like, again, I mean, he's a fierce competitor, so I respect him for that. But in the moment, I was like, this guy is getting on my nerves. So yeah, it's probably letting it show a little bit more. I think his thought was he's, you know, a decade plus younger than me. He's thinking he make this a kick because he'll beat me in a kick. My thinking was, I don't want this to be a kick. So I do want I want to break open the lead at some point. But no, he ran an extremely tactical, a good race that I think, yeah, got in my head a little bit, frustrated me a bit. So, yeah, I think whereas I thought I was fit to run much faster, and it was nice to have a run where I didn't feel like or to have a race where I didn't feel like it came down like I felt like we were overly trained, which is a good thing. That's a situation you wanted to be in. But yeah, it was. I could see from Parker's point of view or a spectator's point of view, I definitely look like I'm hurting in that picture.
Yeah. So then Chris broke away with about 1K to go, and then was able to celebrate going into the finish line shoot and really soak it all in. For me, it was one of the most fulfilling moments that I've ever had in a coaching career. I basically just immediately thought of the first conversation that I had with Chris. And then his wife called my wife to talk about what is it like living in Arizona and moving a family with 2 daughters. And there's just a lot of sacrifices that went into not just the training and being really smart with the training that we were doing, but just the whole life change that he made in order to make this happen for himself. And watching him actually achieve it, it was like, to a degree, it didn't even feel real at the time, because sometimes I think in an athlete's career, like, you don't have that fairy tale race that you really are trying for. And Chris thought that's what Tokyo was. Like, I think you went into Tokyo wanting to do everything you could to medal, and then you were off the podium by 6 seconds. You got 4th by 6 seconds. And so watching him not just win a medal, but win it in a dominant fashion in Paris was pretty epic. And just being able to celebrate that with him and his family. But the interesting part of that for me from a coaching perspective too is that my first thought was like this major sigh of relief. My second one was like missing the process already that we took to get him there. And I thought about doing those crazy 200-meter all-out run workouts where, like, I think somebody coming in knowing that he's training for a triathlon and watching the training that he was doing would think that we were crazy. But it kept getting him fitter and fitter and fitter. And as his physiology changed, I think that played a big role into him being able to comfortably run in the biggest race of his life and be able to make moves when he needed to make moves. Yeah, that gold medal means a whole lot more than the medal itself. It was just all that went into it. And to Chris's credit, he bought into what we were doing. And when I told him, here's the wattage I want you to do for this workout, and he'd be like, that is higher wattage than I've ever done in a race. And we just were able to use the training zones and things that we get from INSCYD, and had a significant were able to make significant improvement as we led into the games. So yeah, like key takeaways for coaches and athletes. I think we have both on this call. I think data is essential for modern coaching. And what I don't mean from data, I mean it far surpasses like some of the basics that you get in Training Peaks. And I think that what makes INSCYD itself something that I think is so intriguing is that it's looking at fitness in a way that we haven't really been able to do unless you're working in a lab or have access to a lab on a regular basis. So we're looking specifically at metabolism, how an athlete is producing energy, and um, what could even change from a diet standpoint or fueling strategies to make sure that they can get the most out of themselves during a competition or training. Some actionable tips are to utilize lactate testing combined with gas exchange analysis to accurately assess your athlete's individual metabolic profile, and then use metabolic profiling to tailor training just like we just described, and then optimize nutrition based off fat and carbohydrate utilization. So from an anaerobic standpoint and a glycolytic standpoint, you have to eat a lot of carbs for that, or you have to have enough carbohydrates in your diet for your VLamax to go up. So when we talked about just daily nutrition with Chris, it wasn't so much like let's cut out some of the other macronutrients. It was more we need to put you on a high carb diet so that you have the fuel that you need to fuel your VLamax to improve. And then some thoughts here. Chris's journey to a gold medal just kind of demonstrated the power of using science and teamwork together. INSCYD allowed us to fine tune things in every detail down to having all the tools in his toolbox that he needed to be successful. And then, if you want to evaluate your own performance or your athlete's performance on a deeper level, then I highly recommend you do a free call with the guys at INSCYD so they can kind of walk you through the platform. And then we do have a couple other questions here, but if you guys have any questions, you can throw them in the chat here on the side. One asked Chris if you work with a sports psychologist. So Chris does have a PhD in sports psychology himself, but as he and I've spoken about before, that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't need to talk to somebody. So he does, but Chris, you can kind of answer that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I come from like my upbringing was more like the suck it up buttercup kind of mindset. So I never really thought about the things that underpin performance on the cognitive side, or underpins your behaviors, actions, and emotions and thoughts. So the fact that I do have a PhD in sports psychology is kind of funny because that was never an approach that I really thought about much. But I'm passionate about performance and the things that do underpin performance, and that ultimately, when it comes down to it, like I believe that performance is 99% your talent and your preparation and maybe 1% mental. But the problem is that 1% mental can control what you get out of the other 99%. So like if you don't have that 1%, then when everything's on the line, you might not execute as you need to, and it might cost you everything. So yeah, I don't think that you should. I know I'm not a great spokesperson for sports psychologists in that regard, but because I do think the emphasis should be placed on putting consistent physical practice. But if you're not addressing the mental side of things, yeah, all that could be for naught. So with that said, I certainly have my resources within the USOPC, within Parker's network. So I do talk with people. One of the things that I'm not great at is confidence. Not that I'm not confident, but I think I always just, I'm always rating myself as like needs improvement. I need to do something better rather than saying like I'm doing something well as it is. So I'm always like, if Parker tells me my numbers, I'm like, I'm not there yet. Like I'm always kind of holding myself back, whether that's a defense mechanism or what, I'm not sure. But so yeah, it does play a role in my life, certainly, and it helped me to get to where I ultimately wanted to get to.
Yeah. And I think to a little bit of what we were talking about before is, do you feel like the being able to have the results from the metabolic testing that we did, do you feel like it gave you confidence going into races or going into training sessions that you may have not had before?
Yeah, I mean, because at that point you feel like if you're not hitting the numbers that your testing says you should be able to hit, then it's on you, because it's on, you, the athlete, that you're not giving the effort that's required, because you've proven that this is something that you can do physically. So yeah, if you can't do it, then you're the one who's just not pushing yourself. And that's one thing that I don't think I've always been great at, even going back to like the all out 200s, is giving that all out effort. It's like, I'm not saying that I'm soft in that regard, but it's like pushing yourself to that ultimate limit of being in pain and not like physically hurt, but like that's not something that's easy to do. So by having that data, it shows you like, no, you physically can do this, but now mentally, can you get yourself there?
Yep. Yeah. And then for if no one has any other questions, when it comes, again, you can put that into the side here if you do. But when it comes to INSCYD, I know that there might be some coaches on here that aren't physically present with their athletes like I am and can do regular lactate testing. Part of the software also has a PPD test that you can do just using power and pace. So power on the bike, pace on the run. You can get a fit file, put that into the system, and it gives you accurate results as well. I think the gold standard, and to get the most out of the software, it is using the gas exchange and using the blood lactate data. But I know that's not always accessible, as do the guys at INSCYD. And so that's why the PPD was created. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about how we do this, how we test, and how to utilize the testing to build training plans, because one of the things that I felt like was that I struggled with when I wanted to really incorporate this was, okay, I got this data. Now, how do I take this data and actually utilize it to make my athletes faster? How do I take this information and build a training program off of it to improve the results? And that is what I think Sebastian kind of was a game changer for me, was being able to take VO2 data, see an athlete's VLamax, look at the different economical information that we get, and incorporate that into a training plan to make my athletes improve. And Sebastian and I are holding a coaching clinic in Arizona with the athletes that I coach here at Project Podium from March 5th to 9th. What you'll be able to do is, if you participate in that, is you'll be able to test elite athletes that I coach, or we'll teach you how to test. And then we'll do some sessions where we'll be in a conference room where we can go through that data. You can learn a little bit more about physiology and then how we take that information and build training plans off of it. So yeah, they put here in the group chat some the hands-on clinic information. So if you have any questions, you can email us about that. So Michael asked, if you have dietary restrictions, does INSCYD work with you on this based off of the needs? Yeah, so basically what it's looking at is macronutrients. So it's not necessarily like giving you a meal plan or something like that. but it's showing where you're getting your energy from. Are you getting more of your energy from carbohydrates? Are you getting more of it from fat? Do you need to become more of a fat dependent athlete? And again, this also changes based off the event that the athlete is training for. So Chris also has participated in some 70.3 races. And so the training obviously for that looks a little bit different because the nice thing for him is what his physiology, his kind of natural makeup is that he's a more aerobic athlete than anaerobic. So honestly, he's probably going to have a much better long course career, even though has already had a very successful short course. So it's not necessarily looking at diet restrictions, but more of what macronutrients do you need to incorporate. And then does the software create training plans for you or basic metrics? Yeah, so it doesn't create a training plan for you. What you can do is get training zones. I use Training Peaks in combination with INSCYD, and I go in and put the training zones that I get from the INSCYD software, and I manually put them into Training Peaks and use that and for that function so that my athletes, one, they know what the workout is kind of built towards, but we talk through these results quite a bit as well. So that's, again, what this clinic is about, is being able to take the information you get from INSCYD and incorporate it into training plans. Josh asked, how often do you have your athletes check on their lactate levels during training? Good question. It all depends on the workout itself. So if it's a threshold specific workout and I don't want them to go higher than threshold, then we may I may bring out the lactate monitor and make sure that they're not going too hard. We did that just last week. We had a session with one of the guys on the track. He needed to keep himself under threshold. And then I slowed him down because his lactate levels were getting up a little bit too high. So it's nice, but I don't think you need to be doing it every single workout. It's more, what's the purpose of the workout? What are you trying to accomplish? And you could do some check-in with the lactate to make sure that you're on track. Next question was, what do you feel was the thing you learned from INSCYD that impacted your performance most of all? Chris, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the one thing is, I've always had incredible coaching and great coaching, but Parker was so in tune with this data and what that meant for my training, and I trusted him completely with it. You know, it's kind of hard when you're in your upper 30s and you're doing something, you're throwing so much trust in, like, to someone who's actually younger than me by a few years. But I really trusted him, you know, completely with the process. I think the best example of this would be when we were in Park City for the final few months leading into the games. So there's often times where my confidence was shaken because, I mean, when you're at altitude and it was hot as well, and you're not, you don't feel as great. You're not running the same times, or you're suffering through the workouts a bit more. And so that kind of maybe gets you thinking, like, oh man, am I starting losing it? Am I pushing it too hard? But when Parker's collecting the data, they said, no, everything's right on track. So just having that to reinforce, for him to inform his training of me and to reinforce that everything was working was super beneficial. So I think it really keeps you true to it's your true north in some ways. Like, the data doesn't lie.
Yep. And then Andy, you asked about doing a clinic like this over in the UK or Europe. I'm sure that, like, Sebastian and I have talked a little bit about that possibly in the future. So we can keep you updated, but feel free to message me and we could talk about this one. There's a direct flight from London to Phoenix, just 5 minutes away from the clinic. Thank you guys all for your questions. And thanks for letting me talk to you about Chris's performance and how we did it. and it was fun for me to even put these slides together and relive some of it. Yeah, I'm super, super grateful at the end of the day that we had a tool like this, and we're able to work with the guys at INSCYD to have a deeper understanding of Chris's physiology. As you can see just through that slide that showed about his improvement, like he made significant improvements across all 3 sports, and we have the hard data to prove it. And he had that proof as he went into the games to build confidence. So thanks a lot to the guys at INSCYD, and thank you for joining us for the hour.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say is I often joke about it, but it is true. Like being in the upper 38 years old and still getting faster, I was like almost worried at times. Does it look like I'm on something, because I shouldn't be getting faster at this point? But it just shows that when you take this data-driven approach, yeah, good things, you can still improve. Good things can happen. So thank you, Parker, and thank you, INSCYD.
Awesome. All right, that's it, guys. Thanks.